Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Sten MkII, and I am very excited to be here today at Morphy's taking a look at an original, authentic British Mark II's Sten gun. This is the sneaky, silent, special purpose version of the Sten. Now, development of this gun did not actually start as an army request. It started as a request for equipment for dropping to resistance units or resistance movements in occupied Europe during World War II. And so in November of 1942, a series of trials was organized in Britain of 6 different types of suppressors on Sten guns. And they tested a bunch of different patterns, sizes, and they ended up essentially picking this one as the best of the bunch. This was the intermediate length. This is about 12¼ inches long. They tried some that were much longer, they tried some that were a little shorter, and this came out as the best compromise between balance and handling and weight and sound reduction. And you would think that, okay, great, that's pretty easy, like you screw it onto a Sten gun and you're good to go, right? Well, not so much. Bureaucracy and other military requirements would get in the way, and there would be further trials to such extent that it wouldn't be until February of 1944 that this was actually accepted and basically put into production. If you're interested in all of the grimy details about the different trials and the different other models of Sten gun that were tested, I would very much suggest checking out the collector grade book on the Sten gun by Peter Laidler. That's my reference source for this video. At any rate, in 1944, in February of 1944, they formally designate this the Sten gun Mark II's, and that S, for what it's worth, stands for special purpose. It doesn't stand for silent or suppressed. And they place an order for 5,000 of them from the Royal Ordnance Factory, Thiel. They later cut that order about in half. In total, between February and May of 1944, there would be orders for 5,776 of these guns. About half of them made at Thiel and the other half of them made at Fazakerley. Royal Ordnance Enfield assembled apparently about 500, maybe as many as 500, perhaps fewer. The records on silent Sten guns are really a bit hazy. We know a little bit about guns like the formal Mark II's because they were recorded, but it's important to point out that during this whole period there were other suppressed Stens that were being put together by Special Operations Executive that were dropped into Europe and were used by British commandos and don't fall into this standard pattern. So if you are in the lucky circumstance of having access to potentially original silenced Sten guns from World War II, be aware that this is the official model. It is far from the only model that actually existed and was used at the time. So, 1944, essentially they come back and go, oh yeah, that early one that we tested, that is in fact still probably our best shot. Let's go ahead and make a bunch and let's start issuing them out to some troops. They did see use in World War II. It's kind of funny. I should also mention that this was formally added to the British list of changes, which is their way of officially adopting the gun, in April of 1945, and immediately, literally the next day or the same day, I don't recall, it was declared obsolescent. So they kind of went back in April of 45 and went, oh right, we have to do the paperwork thing, and adopted it, and then boom, we're done with it, because by that point they were moving on to the Mark V's and then the real production one, the Mark VI Stens. But we'll talk about those afterwards. Let's take a closer look at what a Mark II's is. All right, suppressed Sten gun, how do we do that? Should be fairly simple. The barrel on a Sten Mark II is just screwed into place. So let's take it off and replace it with a barrel that has a silencer on it. Boom, done, right? Sort of. There is a potential issue here that the suppressor can't do anything about a bullet that's traveling supersonic. If the bullet's going faster than the speed of sound, it will make a supersonic crack as it travels through the air, and you'll hear that. No matter how quiet the muzzle report is, that supersonic boom is still going to be pretty obvious and distinctive as a firearm sound. So the idea was to design a barrel where you could feed it standard service ammunition, which is normally supersonic, but it would not develop enough muzzle velocity, it wouldn't develop enough pressure to become supersonic if it was fired through this gun. That way you don't have to have special ammunition for it, which makes a big difference. So, okay, easy enough. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. First off, let me point out the magazine here is just a totally standard Sten magazine, 32 round capacity. And everything from here back, with the exception of the bolt and the mainspring, which we'll touch on in a moment, is totally standard Mark II Sten. But let's come up here and take a look at how this sucker works. Well, it's just threaded in place. Okay, crack that open. This, by the way, is a canvas cover over a horsehair pad. Sometimes they use wrapped asbestos string, the same string that you would use to pack a Vickers gun. And this is just a heat cover because suppressors get hot fast if you shoot much through them. And the Sten doesn't have a grip to allow you to hold on to it anywhere other than the barrel, really. So they put these covers on the suppressor so that you had a way to hold the gun. So there's our standard back end to a Sten barrel. That looks pretty normal. We've got our little ratcheting section there to thread it in and lock it in place. But this is constructed in two parts, so I can also unscrew it here. Aha! Our barrel here is actually only about 3 3/4 inches long. So this is all baffles, like you see there. It is hollow. These did not use a wipe. So the idea of a wipe is a solid rubber plug a solid rubber baffle, essentially, plug at the end of the barrel that basically seals around the back of a bullet after the bullet goes through it. The concept of a wipe makes a silencer significantly, actually quieter, but it is a very short-term thing because after only a handful of cartridges or bullets go through a wipe, you now have blown a real hole in it and it no longer does its job. So some of the really covert guns, like the Welrod, have wipes in the suppressors. The Sten did not. Now, normally we could take this whole baffle stack out. There are 18 baffles in here with wire mesh in between them. However, this one has been used and not cared for in a very long time, and these baffles are pretty thoroughly stuck in there. A good solid ultrasonic cleaning could probably break them out, but that's what we're going to be able to see on this guy. Now, next up, I can actually also unscrew the barrel, and this is pretty cool. So a short barrel is one thing to minimize muzzle velocity, but this is basically pistol length, and the pistols are still shooting this standard British 9mm ammo at supersonic velocities. So you need more than that. So what they did was drill a series of 6 holes right in front of the chamber around the circumference of the barrel, so that as soon as the bullet gets past this point, it's going to vent a lot of the propellant gas out of those holes and into this big empty chamber. So instead of pushing the bullet forward, that gas is just going to get dumped into this chamber. That reduces the muzzle velocity below the level of the speed of sound, which is very convenient. Now, when you see this done on more modern guns, like the suppressed Sterlings or the MP5, you'll see it in a spiral pattern that follows the rifling. And that's not because it's important to have those holes in the lands or in the grooves or anything. It's because if you drill them all in a circle like this, you substantially reduce the strength of the barrel. And in fact, one of the issues that they ran into with Mark II Sten guns, Mark II's silent Sten guns, is slight bulging of the barrel back here because they've cut away a lot of material to do that. It never appears to have been a real operational problem, but that's the thing. And so later iterations of silent guns would do things a little bit differently. This is so, you can't see it here. There is very little rifling left in there. It kind of looks like one of the heavily used C96 Mauser pistols that you'll see around. But this is absolutely, without any doubt, an original Mark II's suppressor. Notice that it is threaded right there, and the muzzle of the barrel is threaded, and that is for putting this back together like so. So there's our expansion chamber, and then this is a whole stack of baffles. So this makes the gun very quiet. And is that all that's required? Well, not quite. All right, so here's our problem. We have deliberately reduced the power of the cartridge by reducing its velocity. That's great for the silencer, but it also means we're now putting less energy into the bolt to cycle the gun. And without any changes made to the gun, now it's probably going to short stroke, not quite cycle far enough back to pick up the next cartridge. Or perhaps worse, it's going to cycle far enough back to pick up the cartridge, but not far enough to catch the sear and have what we would call a runaway gun where it will continuously fire. This is bad in general, and it's also bad because on the Sten MkII in particular, you are not supposed to be firing full auto. You're supposed to fire single shots only, absolutely worst case, short bursts. The issue here is if you fire in full auto, there's not enough time between shots for all the gas to vent out of the suppressor. Pressure builds up in the back, and it actually jams the baffles together, potentially damaging them, best case, making them very difficult to disassemble. This was a legitimate, recognized problem with this suppressor design, and in fact, some of the Mark II's guns were actually blocked to only fire semi-auto. Not all of them. There's actually, in general, there's quite a lot of not adherence to standard rules when it comes to the suppressed Stens. There's a lot of variation, a lot of field modification, that sort of thing. But what was universal was don't fire them in full auto. So you definitely don't want a runaway gun. Well, how do you deal with, how do you fix this so that our reduced power cartridge will still operate the gun? Well, we will do two things. One is to shorten the mainspring. But the important one is to reduce the weight of the bolt. So a standard Sten bolt is cylindrical. This has been cut out, you could say wasp wasted. The middle has been removed. And what they've done here is reduce the weight of the bolt by basically 1/6. So a standard Sten bolt weighs just under 600 grams. This weighs just under 500 grams, like 493 grams. By doing this. So you have less mass, which means you need less energy to push this back and cycle it. At the same time, they also reduced the mainspring. Typically speaking, they would reduce them from 15 to about 14 coils. So not much, just a slight reduction in length of the mainspring. And this wasn't really done to any extremely specific pattern. The concept was you'd have the milled bolt, and then the operating velocity of the bolt actually has a lot to do with the specifics of an individual silencer and the amount of friction that you may have in a particular gun tube. So you take your lightened bolt and your armorer takes your standard mainspring, and they essentially just test fire the gun, reducing the mainspring in length until it cycles properly and catches and doesn't run away. And so each one of these is sort of a set that is not strictly speaking interchangeable, and that's a set between the spring, the bolt, and the suppressor. Well, the whole suppressor, which I haven't reassembled yet. This is basically what defines a Mark II's. You've got the silencer barrel on the end, you've got the reduced weight bolt, and the reduced length mainspring, and that's pretty much it. Markings are highly variable. There was never a Mark II's officially done on the gun itself. There are sometimes proof marks on the silencers, sometimes not. There's quite a lot of variation. What I like about this is we can really pretty much know from its provenance and its condition and its mechanics that this is an authentic original example. This is a registered gun in the US. It is a machine gun because it is a Sten gun, and it was actually registered so long ago that it was registered with an IRS number, not a modern ATF sort of serial number. We have the standard really cheesy marks that you would expect on a Mark II Sten. It is marked Sten Mark II on the top there. It does have a nail holding that spring in place. That's obviously not original, but it's been in there for a while. This is really a pretty perfect example of a World War II vet bring back Mark II's silenced Sten gun. These guns were used in World War II, but they were also used extensively in Southeast Asia by the British, in Malaya, in Singapore, areas that were perhaps a bit more conducive to sneaky covert operations, specifically going out and trying to capture high-ranking prisoners, that sort of thing. That happened in the 1950s in places like Malaya, more, I think, than it did during World War II. In addition, the British had developed a version, well, obviously by the end of the war they had the Mark V Sten instead of the Mark II and III Stens, and the Mark V is better in virtually every way. And so naturally one would think that they would want a silenced version of the Mark V. They did. That became known as the Mark VI, and they made nearly 25,000 of those, so almost 4 or 5 times as many as of the Mark IIs. This is really the very rare pattern from World War II. There were some issues, though, with you couldn't just easily do a Mark V Sten the same way you could easily do a Mark II, because the Mark V Sten has a front sight, a Lee Enfield style front sight on the barrel. So of course, you can't just take the whole barrel off. The barrel's pinned in place so that it can't rotate because it's got that front sight on it, where on the Mark IIs and Mark IIIs, the front sight's on the receiver tube. So the barrel was just screw the barrel on and it doesn't matter how it's oriented, which works really nicely for a suppressed barrel. So they had to make a couple workarounds for the Mark V Sten, the Mark V suppressed, which was the Mark VI Sten. And they ended up making a lot more of them. But the Mark IIs actually did stay in service until, believe it or not, 1971 or 72. Eventually, they were replaced in service by the L34A1, which is the suppressed Sterling gun. But these, for as crude and as simplistic as a silent Sten gun is, they were in service for a very long time. They're kind of the gold standard of pre-Vietnam silenced military covert operations arms, which I think makes them really cool. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. It is extremely uncommon to find legitimate original Mark II S's, and it was very fun to be able to get a chance to take a look at this one and show you what a real example actually looks like. So thanks for watching.